So in the comments of one of my videos that I made, the one that really took off was the one about the trailer length and stuff. But somebody asked a question about whether I thought it was better to have, hauling cars, whether I thought it was better to have a 3-car hauler or a 4-car or 3 cars with a flip out that has 3 axles, or is it better to have a 2-axle trailer or a single tandem set or something like that? So here's the thing. It really depends on what you're trying to do, right? I mean, if you're non-CDL, you want to have as little bit of weight on that trailer as you can possibly have, because whatever is on your trailer is not in your payload. Now, I've made a video before that talked about, as far as payload goes, whether you're carrying a Honda Civic or an F-250, they usually pay the same amount per mile. So, go out and get you a bunch of Honda Civics, but because it's less fuel mileage and it's easier to go through the, you don't have to worry so much about going through the scales if you're non-CDL. And even if you're CDL, if you're running a 3-car trailer with a CDL, some of the bigger vehicles, you can only get a couple of them on there, or maybe where you can put 4, you can only put 3. So it does make a lot of sense with that. But back to the axle problem. So if you have a trailer, if you're looking at trailers, and there are 2 axles, 2 7,000-pound Dexter axles on there, remember, about 6 feet in front of those axles headed towards the truck, you begin to transfer the weight into the truck until it becomes, a little bit further than that, about another 6 feet or so, you're really getting up there. But about 6 feet forward, you're running about 40% of the weight of your payload into the axle of the truck. Okay, so think about it. If you got two 7,000-pound axles back there, how much of that are you really going to be using? I mean, the reality is that's 14,000 pounds, but it's on the rear axles. You got to carry a lot to get 14,000 pounds on those rear axles. So again, I would stress to you that if you're non-CDL, 3 axles, you can forget it, because 3 axles, that second axle with leaf springs and the brakes and the tires and everything, I'm thinking it adds like 450, 500 pounds, and many times that can be the difference between how many cars you can put on there, because you may look at a load and say, dang, I can get these cars on there, but it's going to be 26,003 pounds, and if you didn't have that third axle, you wouldn't have that. And then that brings us to the single tandem. Now, I've seen some single tandems out there, and that single tandem axle is, in most manufacturers, it's either a 10,000. I've seen some that are 16,000 single axle. Most of them are 10,000. Some of them are 16,000. I would say most of them are 16,000. Some of them are 10. But a single tandem axle, it's gonna have the leverage. Leverage. It's gonna work like as a fulcrum point, right? So if you put something heavy on the back, it's going to want to pick up the truck, but you don't have to go very far in front of that one set of tires at all. I mean, it's about 3 feet forward on that one set of tires, and it begins to shift weight, and it gets pretty quick to shift to the front, because there's just not that second axle to oppose some of that weight distribution. So be mindful of that. If it's me and I'm non-CDL, I'm running twin Dexter 7000s. If I'm CDL, maybe I get 3 Dexters on there. Again, the tandems at 16,000 pounds are more than your Dexters at 14,000 pounds, but they're less than the 3 axles would be if you're running CDL. If you notice, I didn't even think about talking about 3 axles with a non-CDL setup, because of the weight, but also because typically you see those 3 axles on a heavier trailer, trailer designed for 4 cars. Although there's some 3 cars running around out there like that, but typically have a flip outs for the 4 cars. If you're non-CDL, I mean, unless you're, when I transport a lot of those mini trucks, if you're doing those mini trucks, you can do it. But so axle wise, if you're non-CDL, 2 axles, 2 Dexter 7,000 pounds. If you're CDL, you can go to the 3 axles. The other thing that's bad about 3 axles, by the way, is that the rear axle set, those tires tend to become drag tires. So when you're turning, even on 2 axles, the tires can get worn out, but on a 3 axle, the back set of tires is almost always lighter than the front set, so they drag real bad around corners, and you'll be replacing a lot of back tires. I have a Lamar 43-foot low deck that I use for hauling tractors and some of those mini trucks, and those rear tires, I end up replacing the rear tires on there quite often, you know, probably 2 or 3 times the rate of the center tire, and at least double the rate of the front tire, because it seems to want to pivot off the center axle. The center axle wants to turn, which is the whole purpose behind the single tandem axle, is that when you turn, there's no drag tire either side of that axle. There's no drag tire, and it does make them a little bit easier to maneuver because there's no tire trying to drag or anything. So it can save you some money in tires. But again, I'm not entirely sold on the single tandem, in that it tends to force a lot of weight into the truck axle. And if you're driving a 3500 F350 or 3500 such and such, you know, you don't want to force too much weight into the rear axle, because if you've got again a couple of 7,000 pounds, you know, into that. I mean, if you had one 16,000 pound axle, and you're forcing a lot of weight forward, and you've got a 3500 series 350, your rear axles can only handle 9,900 pounds. And so let's say you get just 3 cars, and each car weighs, you know, 4,000 pounds. So you got 12,000 pounds worth of cars. That one on the back is offsetting a little bit, because again, that's your leverage point, or your fulcrum point is where the axle is. So the one on the back can tilt it down, is pulling up a little bit, but the other two are really putting it into there. So if each car is 4,000, I'm not going to show it, but man, I just hit a cataclysmic hole in the road. Felt like there was a hole in the planet right there in South Carolina, I-95, if anybody knows. Anyway, so is, you know, in summary, the number of axles, you know, obviously are going to dictate how much the truck can, I mean, how much the trailer can take on it, right? But again, you have to start thinking about fuel mileage, the decrease in fuel mileage. Again, 3 axles, there's going to be a drag tires on the rear. They're going to wear out fast, so you end up putting tires on the back all the time. Not to mention, you know, you're going to actually end up putting grease seals in that back axle too, because there's a lot of pressure on that hub, and it can actually loosen and cause it to have a lot of, you know, movement that can wear out the grease seal in the back on that back axle. So there's a lot of variables that go into there. Tandem axles, almost all tandem axles at least come in oil bath, and I've made videos before. I'm not a big oil bath fan, just because they're not reliable, and everything is, you know, hinged on the rear seal on that thing being good. If it goes bad at all, boom, there goes all your lubricant, and you be going down the road and it go dry like that. Whereas with grease, let's say the grease cap falls off or pops off or something, it's going to take a while for that grease to work its way out of there. You'll probably have found it when you stop the next time or something, and it'll be okay. But back to the number of axles. 2 axles is the lightest way to go. It doesn't have any drag on the rear tire like the 3 axle setups do. The 3 axles can handle more weight, but how much weight are you actually going to put back there? A lot of it's transferring into the truck at that point when you put 4 cars on it, and you only have a 9,900 pound rear axle. Now if you get a 450 or 4,500, you get a little bit more. You get typically about 11,000 pounds on the rear axle. It's about 1,000 pounds more on the rear axle of those. 5,500s, they're up to like 14,000 pounds. You got no worries there. You're not going to overload that axle without, you know, putting something very heavy right on the top of the trailer. But anyway, that's just my opinion on the axles. You can draw from what you can. If you're non-CDL, 2 axles is the only way to fly. If you're CDL, make a decision.